In the opulent Bernardin San Francisco, a 17-year-old boy was about to discover his family's devastating betrayal. What started as a celebratory dinner took a shocking turn when he faced a $50,000 fraudulent bill. Stephen Thompson wasn't your typical naive teenager. For 5 years since his father's death, he had navigated financial instability, known for his sharp intelligence and keen observation skills. When his mother and stepfather vanished mid-dinner, he had no idea he was walking into an elaborate criminal setup. Stephen's investigation would expose a sophisticated money laundering empire. What began as family celebration became a fight for survival and justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Stephen Thompson adjusted his tie for the third time as the Uber pulled up to Le Bernardin San Francisco. The restaurant's understated elegance struck him immediately. No flashy neon signs or gaudy displays, just clean lines and warm lighting that whispered rather than shouted about exclusivity. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see diners in expensive suits and designer dresses, their conversations accompanied by the soft clink of crystal and silver. "This is it," he murmured to himself, stepping out onto the sidewalk. For the first time in years, Stephen felt genuinely hopeful about his future. Richard Blackwood had married his mother 6 months ago, and tonight was supposed to be their celebration dinner, a family milestone that Stephen had never imagined possible after his father's death 5 years earlier. The hostess greeted him with practiced warmth. "Mr. Thompson, your party is already seated. Right this way." Stephen followed her through the dining room, his worn dress shoes silent against the polished marble floor. He'd borrowed the tie from Marcus, his best friend, and the jacket was a thrift store find from 2 years ago. But tonight, surrounded by San Francisco's elite, he didn't feel out of place. He felt like he belonged. His mother, Linda, looked radiant at their corner table, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon, wearing the pearl necklace Richard had given her for their wedding. Richard himself cut an impressive figure in his tailored navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, exuding the confidence that came with success. When Stephen approached, Richard stood and embraced him with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Stephen, my boy, you look sharp tonight." Richard's smile reached his eyes, or at least Stephen wanted to believe it did. "I'm glad we could finally do this properly, the three of us, celebrating as a family." Linda beamed as Stephen sat down. "Isn't this wonderful, sweetheart? I can hardly believe how much our lives have changed." The first hour unfolded like something from a dream Stephen had harbored but never dared voice. Richard regaled them with stories from his latest business ventures, painting pictures of international deals and boardroom negotiations, with the casual ease of someone accustomed to success. He spoke of Stephen's future with the kind of certainty that had been absent from Stephen's life since his father's death. "I've been thinking about your college applications," Richard said, swirling his wine. "With your grades and my connections, we could be looking at Stanford, maybe even Harvard. The world opens up when you have the right backing." Stephen felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the sparkling cider in his glass. After years of watching his mother struggle with 2 jobs and late-night bill-paying sessions, the idea of security, real security, seemed almost too good to be true. But as the evening progressed, Stephen began to notice things, small details that didn't quite fit the picture Richard was painting. The way Richard's eyes would dart toward his phone when he thought no one was looking. How Linda's smile seemed to tighten whenever the conversation turned to specific plans. The subtle tension between his mother and stepfather, when they thought Stephen wasn't paying attention. "Richard," Linda said during a lull in conversation, her voice carrying a note Stephen couldn't quite identify. "Perhaps we should discuss the timing of—" "Not tonight, darling." Richard's interruption was smooth, but Stephen caught the sharp look that passed between them. "Tonight is about celebrating our family." Stephen pushed the unease aside. He was probably imagining things, reading tension where none existed, because he'd spent so many years waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was different. This was real. Richard's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it, and Stephen saw something flicker across his features. Concentration, perhaps urgency. I'm terribly sorry, Richard said, his tone apologetic but his movements already purposeful. There's a situation with the Hong Kong deal that requires immediate attention. Linda, would you mind stepping outside with me? This might require both our signatures on some documents. Linda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Now? Can't it wait until... Unfortunately, no time zones, you understand. Will only be a few minutes. Richard was already standing, his charm intact, but his urgency unmistakable. Stephen, order dessert if you'd like. We'll be right back. Stephen watched them leave, Richard's hand on Linda's elbow guiding her toward the exit with practiced efficiency. Through the window, he could see them standing near the valet station, Richard speaking rapidly while Linda nodded, her posture rigid. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Stephen tried calling his mother's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Richard's number did the same. 30 minutes stretched into an hour. The waiter had refilled Stephen's water glass 3 times, each visit accompanied by increasingly pointed glances. Other diners were beginning to stare, not overtly, but with the practiced discretion of people accustomed to observing without appearing to do so. Stephen's chest began to tighten. This wasn't right. Something was very wrong. When he tried to leave, the waiter intercepted him at the door, with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Sir, there seems to be a matter with your table's account that needs to be resolved before you can depart. I'm sorry, what? Stephen's voice cracked slightly. My stepfather will handle the bill when he returns. I'm afraid there's been a private dining event charged to your account, Mr. Thompson. The total comes to $50,000. The words hit Stephen like a physical blow. 50,000? That's impossible. I'm 17 years old. I don't have that kind of money. I couldn't even get a credit card for $50. The waiter's expression remained professionally neutral, but Stephen could see the skepticism in his eyes. The reservation was made under your name, sir, with your signature on the authorization forms. Show me. The papers the waiter produced made Stephen's knees weak. There was his name, typed neatly on the reservation form. And there, at the bottom, was a signature that looked remarkably like his own, close enough to fool anyone who didn't know him intimately, but wrong in subtle ways that Stephen recognized immediately. Someone had forged his signature. Someone had used his name to book a private dining event that cost more than most people made in a year, and that someone had disappeared, leaving him to face the consequences alone. As the reality of his situation crashed over him, Stephen felt something fundamental shift inside him. The hopeful, trusting teenager who had walked into Bernardin San Francisco was gone, replaced by someone harder, more calculating. Someone who understood that the people you trusted most could hurt you in ways you never imagined possible. The restaurant's security was already moving toward him. Stephen's mind raced, analyzing the situation with a clarity born of desperation. He had been set up, abandoned, and betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect him. But he wasn't going to go down without a fight. Richard and Linda had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated him, and Stephen intended to prove just how costly that mistake would be. Stephen's hands trembled as he studied the forged signature, but his mind was already shifting into survival mode. The security guard's presence loomed behind him, and he could feel the weight of other diners' stares, but he forced himself to think clearly. Panic would accomplish nothing. Richard and Linda had orchestrated this betrayal carefully, but they had left evidence behind. I need to speak with your manager, Stephen said, his voice steadier than he felt. This is fraud, and I can prove it. The waiter exchanged glances with the security guard. Mr. Wu is already on his way. James Wu appeared within minutes, a thin, nervous man in his 40s whose eyes darted between Stephen and the documents as if he were watching a tennis match. Stephen recognized the look immediately. Wu knew something. Mr. Thompson, Wu began, his accent carrying the careful precision of someone for whom English was a second language. This is a very serious situation. The private dining event was extensive. Wine, catering, use of our exclusive meeting room. The charges are legitimate. The signature isn't. Stephen placed the paper on the nearest table, pointing to the subtle differences he'd noticed. Look at the S in Stephen. I write it with a backward slant. This one's forward. And the T in Thompson. Mine has a distinctive hook at the end. This is a forgery. Wu leaned closer, and Stephen saw recognition flicker in his eyes. The manager had noticed the discrepancies too. Even if that's true, Wu said carefully, the reservation was made with a valid credit card under your name. The event took place. Someone must be held responsible. Who attended this private event? Stephen pressed. There should be records, security footage. If I'm supposedly responsible for booking it, I should know who came, right? Wu's hesitation was telling. That information is confidential. Stephen's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Where are you? Thought we were hanging out tonight. Relief flooded through him. Marcus. His best friend was tech-savvy, resourceful, and, most importantly, someone Stephen could trust completely. He quickly typed back, Emergency. Le Bernardin SF. Come now. Bring laptop. I want to see the security footage, Stephen said to Wu. If I booked this event, I should be on camera setting it up, meeting with the attendees. If I'm not, then someone else is responsible. Wu's nervous energy increased. The footage is not something we typically... Mr. Wu. The voice carried authority despite its youth. Stephen turned to see a tall man in chef's whites approaching mid-50s, with graying temples and the kind of presence that commanded attention. I am Antoine Dubois. This is my restaurant. Chef Dubois studied Stephen with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. You are the young man claiming he did not book our platinum room for tonight's event? I didn't just not book it, Stephen said, meeting the chef's gaze directly. I've never even heard of your platinum room until 10 minutes ago. Someone used my name and forged my signature to set up whatever meeting happened here tonight. Interesting. Dubois turned to Wu. James, show me tonight's footage from the platinum room. Wu's face went pale. Chef, I'm not sure that's... Now, James. As Wu reluctantly led them toward the back office, Stephen caught Dubois studying him with calculating eyes. The chef was reading him, the same way Stephen had learned to read people during years of instability and uncertainty. You have been betrayed, Dubois said quietly as they walked. By someone close to you. It wasn't a question. Stephen nodded, not trusting his voice. Richard Blackwood, Dubois continued, and Stephen's step faltered. Your stepfather has used my restaurant before for his business meetings. Always very particular about privacy. Very generous with his tips to ensure discretion. The pieces were clicking into place. You know him. I know many wealthy men who conduct business that requires privacy, but I have never seen one bring his family to dinner before arranging to abandon his stepson with a bill of this magnitude. Dubois' expression hardened. This crosses a line, even for Richard. Wu unlocked his office door with obvious reluctance. The security monitors showed multiple camera angles throughout the restaurant. Stephen watched as Wu pulled up the footage from earlier that evening, his movements slow and deliberate. The platinum room footage showed exactly what Stephen had suspected. Richard and Linda, along with 3 other people Stephen didn't recognize, conducting what appeared to be a business meeting. Documents were exchanged, handshakes were given, and at one point, Richard raised a glass in what looked like a toast. There, Stephen pointed at the timestamp. That's when they were supposed to be outside, taking their urgent business call. They were in your private dining room, conducting whatever deal they've now stuck me with paying for. Marcus's arrival broke the tension in the small office. Stephen's best friend took one look at the scene. The security footage, the nervous manager, Stephen's grim expression, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. What do you need me to do? Marcus asked simply. Stephen felt the first spark of hope since this nightmare began. He wasn't alone. And Richard Blackwood had made his first critical mistake. He had underestimated both Stephen's intelligence and the loyalty of the people who truly cared about him. Help me prove that I've been set up, Stephen said. And help me figure out why. As Marcus set up his laptop and began his own investigation, Stephen realized his transformation was complete. The trusting teenager was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival meant thinking 10 steps ahead of your enemies, even when those enemies were supposed to be your family. Part 3. Unlikely alliances. Marcus's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his concentrated features. Stephen watched his best friend work, feeling a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Marcus had dropped everything to come help him. No questions asked, no hesitation. It was the kind of loyalty Stephen had thought he'd found in his new family, the kind that had turned out to be an illusion. "Okay, this is interesting," Marcus said, his voice carrying the excitement he always got when he was deep in a technical puzzle. "I pulled up Richard's digital footprint from the past 6 months. Your mom wasn't kidding when she said he was successful, but some of these transactions..." He paused, scrolling through data. "They don't add up." Chef Dubois leaned over Marcus's shoulder, his expression darkening as he scanned the information. "Show me the restaurant payments." Here, Marcus highlighted a series of entries. Le Bernardin shows up 12 times in the past 4 months. Always private dining, always cash payments, always with different names on the reservations but the same credit card processing code. Stephen felt his stomach drop. 12 times? But he told us this was the first time he'd brought us here. "It gets worse," Marcus continued, his fingers never stopping their dance across the keys. "I cross-referenced the dates with some public records I can access through my dad's law firm account. Marcus's father was a corporate attorney, and his access to legal databases had proven useful before. 3 of these dates correspond with major financial transactions involving shell companies that Richard either owns or has significant influence over." Wu, who had been standing in the corner looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "Chef Dubois, perhaps we should..." "James," Dubois' voice carried a warning. "You have worked for me for 8 years. I have always protected my staff, but I cannot protect what I do not understand. Tell me what you know about these meetings." Wu's composure cracked. They weren't just business dinners. They were negotiations. Money changed hands. Not just payment for meals, but briefcases, documents. I was told to stay away from the Platinum Room during those events, to ensure the waitstaff didn't see anything. "But you saw," Stephen said, reading the guilt in Wu's expression. "The security cameras. I monitor them from here during large events, to ensure everything runs smoothly. I saw enough to know that whatever Mr. Blackwood was conducting, it wasn't legitimate business." Marcus looked up from his screen. "I'm seeing wire transfers to offshore accounts, shell company formations, and, Stephen, you need to see this." His voice had gone quiet, serious. "I found the digital paper trail for tonight's event. It wasn't just booked under your name. It was paid for with a credit card that was opened using your social security number and personal information." The room went silent. Stephen felt the walls closing in, the full scope of Richard's betrayal becoming clear. "Identity theft." "More than that," Marcus said grimly. "I'm seeing credit applications, bank account openings, even what looks like a business license application, all using your information, all within the past 2 months. Stephen, he's been building a false identity for you without your knowledge." Chef Dubois straightened, his expression shifting from concern to barely controlled anger. "Richard Blackwood has been using my restaurant as a front for money laundering, and now he has framed a child for his crimes." His accent became more pronounced as his emotions intensified. "This ends now, Chef," Wu protested. "If we get involved..." "We are already involved, James. The question is whether we choose to be complicit or to act with honor." Dubois turned to Stephen. "You said someone close to you betrayed you. Your mother? She was part of this?" Stephen's throat tightened. Even now, even with all the evidence, saying it out loud felt like admitting defeat. "She knew. Maybe not everything, but she knew enough." Marcus reached over and squeezed Stephen's shoulder. "We're gonna fix this, man. All of it." "How?" Stephen asked, the weight of his situation pressing down on him. "He's got lawyers, money, connections. I'm just a kid with a forged signature and a massive debt I can't pay. You're not just anything, Dubois said firmly. You are someone who has been wronged, and you are not alone. He pulled out his phone. I am calling Detective Sarah Morrison. She specializes in financial crimes, and she has been asking questions about certain irregularities in some of our recent private bookings. Stephen's heart jumped. The police are already investigating? Detective Morrison has been tracking suspicious activities in several high-end restaurants throughout the city. Money laundering through hospitality businesses is more common than people realize. Your stepfather's operation may be larger than just what happened here tonight. As if summoned by their conversation, Stephen's phone rang. His mother's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment he stared at it, paralyzed by the competing emotions coursing through him. Anger, hurt, hope, love, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't unravel. Marcus reached over. Put it on speaker. Stephen answered. Mom? Stephen, honey, where are you? Linda's voice was strained, artificial. Richard and I got caught up in an emergency with the Hong Kong deal. We're so sorry to have left you, but we need you to come home right away. I'm still at the restaurant, Mom, with the $50,000 bill you left me to handle. Silence stretched across the connection. When Linda spoke again, her voice was different. Flatter, more careful. Stephen, I don't know what you're talking about. What bill? The bill for the private dining event that was booked under my name. The one you and Richard attended while I sat alone at our table, waiting for you to come back. Stephen, you're not making sense. Richard and I have been at his office all evening dealing with this crisis. Maybe you should come home so we can sort this out. Marcus was already typing, his expression grim. He turned his laptop screen towards Stephen, showing a real-time location tracker. Linda's phone was pinging from a location 30 miles south of the city, nowhere near Richard's downtown office. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Stephen stared at the screen, watching his mother's lies crumble in real time. The last vestige of hope that there had been some mistake, some misunderstanding, died in that moment. I know where you are, Mom, Stephen said quietly, and I know what you and Richard did. The question is, are you going to help me fix this, or are you going to keep lying to protect him? The line went dead. Stephen looked around the room at the faces of the people who had chosen to help him. Marcus, who had dropped everything to be there. Chef Dubois, who was risking his business to do what was right. Even Wu, who was finally ready to tell the truth despite his fears. These people, virtual strangers just hours ago, had shown him more loyalty in one evening than his own family had in months. Detective Morrison, Stephen said as Dubois finished his call. When will she be here? 20 minutes, Dubois replied. And Stephen? She is very interested in hearing what you have to say. As they waited, Stephen realized that his transformation was accelerating. The family he had been born into had betrayed him, but he was discovering what chosen family really meant. And with that understanding came a new kind of strength, the determination not just to survive, but to ensure that Richard Blackwood's victims received the justice they deserved. The real investigation was just beginning. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to complex financial crimes. She was younger than Stephen had expected, maybe late 30s, with short, auburn hair and the kind of focused intensity that made him understand why Richard's operation had caught her attention. Mr. Thompson, she said, settling into Wu's office chair with an ease that suggested she'd conducted hundreds of similar interviews. Chef Dubois tells me you've been the victim of identity theft and fraud. I'd like to hear your version of events. Stephen recounted the evening methodically, from his initial hope at dinner through the devastating revelation of the forged signature. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. The credit card applications Marcus found, she said when Stephen finished. I need to see those. Marcus turned his laptop toward her, and Stephen watched Morrison's expression shift from professional interest to something harder. This matches patterns we've been tracking across 6 restaurants in the city. Same methodology. False identities, shell companies, private dining events that serve as cover for money transfers. So this isn't just about me, Stephen said. Unfortunately, no. You're the latest victim in what appears to be a sophisticated operation. Morrison's tone gentled slightly. But you're also the first victim who's fought back effectively. Most people in your situation would have panicked, paid the bill somehow, and never discovered the broader conspiracy. Wu shifted uncomfortably. Detective, what about the restaurant's liability we unknowingly facilitated? Your cooperation now will be noted in my report, Mr. Wu. Chef Dubois' willingness to provide security footage and your testimony about the previous events will be crucial for prosecution. Stephen felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he wasn't alone in this, anger that others had been victimized, and a growing determination to see justice done. But underneath it all was a deeper hurt, the knowledge that his mother had chosen Richard over him. My mother, Stephen said quietly. She's got to face charges too, isn't she? Morrison studied him carefully. That depends on the extent of her involvement. Financial crimes often involve family members who are manipulated or coerced. But the evidence suggests active participation, not just passive victimization. Marcus looked up from his continued digital investigation. Detective, I'm seeing wire transfers from Linda Thompson's personal accounts to several of these shell companies, and there are email communications between her and Richard discussing the Stephen situation dating back 2 months. The words hit Stephen like a physical blow. 2 months. His mother had been planning his betrayal for 2 months, probably since before Richard had even suggested this celebratory dinner. I need to see those emails, Morrison said. As Marcus pulled up the communications, Stephen watched his childhood officially end. The emails detailed how to use his personal information, when to set up the false accounts, and most damaging of all, Linda's concerns about whether Stephen would figure things out too quickly. She had known he was intelligent. She had known he would investigate. And she had helped Richard plan around that knowledge. Stephen, Morrison said gently, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? If Richard realizes you've involved law enforcement, you could be in danger. Chef Dubois spoke up immediately. He can stay at my home. I have a guest room, and my neighborhood has excellent security. Stephen looked around the room at these people who had become his allies in the span of a few hours. Marcus, still working tirelessly to uncover evidence. Wu, finally ready to tell the truth despite his fears. Dubois, offering his home to a teenager he'd just met. And Morrison, treating him not as a victim to be pitied, but as a partner in seeking justice. Thank you, Stephen said, his voice stronger than he felt. All of you. But I'm not hiding. If Richard wants to escalate this, let him. I'm done being the victim in his game. Morrison smiled grimly. Good. Because tomorrow, we're gonna need you to help us catch him in the act. Stephen barely slept that night at Chef Dubois' home, his mind churning through the email evidence Marcus had uncovered. The messages between his mother and Richard painted a picture so devastating that part of him wondered if he was trapped in some elaborate nightmare. But when dawn broke over San Francisco, the harsh reality remained. The woman who had raised him, who had held him through nightmares after his father's death, had spent 2 months planning his destruction. At 7 a.m., his phone rang. Detective Morrison's voice was grim. Stephen, we need to meet immediately. My team worked through the night analyzing Marcus's data, and we've uncovered something significant. Can you and Marcus get to the station within the hour? An hour later, Stephen sat in Morrison's office, staring at a wall of evidence that made his stomach turn. Financial records, email chains, bank statements, all painting a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond what he'd imagined. Your mother wasn't just a willing participant, Morrison said, her voice carefully controlled. According to what we've found, she was Richard's partner from the beginning. The marriage wasn't just about love, Stephen, it was a business arrangement. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet, looked up from his laptop. There's more. I traced some of the shell company formations back 18 months, before they even got married. Linda Thompson was creating false identities and fraudulent accounts, long before she became Linda Thompson Blackwood. The room seemed to tilt around Stephen. You're saying she was a criminal before she met Richard? We're saying she was already Richard's criminal partner when she met him, Morrison clarified. The romance, the whirlwind courtship, the marriage, it was all orchestrated to create a family structure that could better facilitate their operations. Stephen felt something crack inside his chest. So none of it was real. She never loved him. She never wanted stability for us. It was all just a con, Marcus finished quietly. I'm sorry, man. Morrison's phone buzzed. She answered, listened for a moment. Then her expression sharpened. Bring her up immediately. Stephen looked up, confused, as Morrison addressed him. Stephen, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. Someone who might help you understand how Richard operates. The woman who entered Morrison's office was striking, early 30s, with Richard's sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes, but carrying herself with the wary tension of someone who had learned not to trust easily. She wore an expensive coat, but her jewelry was minimal, practical. When she spoke, her voice carried a familiar authority. You must be Stephen Thompson. I'm Victoria Blackwood, Richard's daughter. Stephen stared at her. He never mentioned having a daughter. Victoria's smile was bitter. I'm not surprised. Richard prefers to pretend I don't exist, especially since I discovered what he really does for a living. She settled into the chair across from him, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. You look like I did 5 years ago. Shocked, hurt, trying to process how someone you trusted could destroy you so completely. 5 years ago? When I was 27. I thought my father was a successful businessman who loved his family. I was working at his company, being groomed to take over eventually. Then I started noticing discrepancies in the accounts, unexplained transactions, meetings with people who made me uncomfortable. Victoria's voice grew harder. When I confronted him about it, he tried to frame me for embezzlement, made it look like I'd been stealing from the company for years. Stephen felt a chill of recognition. The same thing he's doing to me. Exactly the same thing. Create false documentation, establish a pattern of suspicious activity under your name, then disappear when the authorities come looking. Victoria leaned forward. The only difference is that you figured it out faster than I did. And you have better allies. Marcus had been typing throughout Victoria's story. I'm cross-referencing the shell companies Stephen found with companies that existed 5 years ago. There are definitely patterns here. Same methodologies, same types of financial structures. Richard doesn't just commit crimes, Victoria continued. He creates elaborate narratives where someone else is the villain. Someone close to him, someone who trusts him completely. It makes him feel powerful, I think. The idea that he can manipulate people who love him into destroying themselves. Morrison pulled out a thick file. Victoria has been providing us with information about Richard's past operations for the past 2 years. We've been building a case, but we needed current evidence of active fraud to make arrests. What happened to you last night gives us that evidence. But there's something else you need to know, Victoria said, her expression growing more serious. Richard doesn't just abandon his victims. Once he realizes they're a threat to his operation, he eliminates that threat, not necessarily violence. Richard's too sophisticated for that. But he has ways of discrediting people, destroying their credibility, making sure no one believes their accusations. Stephen's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stephen, this is Richard. We need to talk immediately. Your mother is very worried about the stories you're telling. Meet me at Pier 39 in 1 hour, or there will be consequences for everyone you care about. Victoria read the message over his shoulder and cursed under her breath. That's exactly what I was afraid of. He's realized you're a problem. Morrison stood immediately. This is perfect. We can use this meeting to get him on record admitting to the fraud. It's too dangerous, Victoria protested. Richard is desperate now. Desperate people make dangerous choices. Stephen stared at the message, then at the faces around him. Marcus, loyal and worried. Morrison, calculating the tactical advantages. Victoria, genuinely concerned for his safety. These people had become his real family in less than 24 hours, while the people who were supposed to love him had spent months planning his downfall. I'll do it, Stephen said, but I want Victoria there as backup. If Richard has patterns, she knows what to watch for. Victoria nodded slowly. I've been waiting 5 years for a chance to stop him. If you're brave enough to face him, I'll make sure you don't face him alone. As they planned the confrontation, Stephen realized that his transformation was nearly complete. The trusting teenager was gone, replaced by someone who understood that family was a choice, not an accident of birth. And he had chosen his family wisely. Now it was time to face the people who had chosen to betray him. Part 6. The enemy revealed. The fog rolled in from the bay as Stephen walked toward Pier 39. The wire Morrison had taped to his chest feeling cold against his skin. Through his earpiece, he could hear Victoria's steady breathing as she positioned herself near the aquarium entrance, and Marcus's nervous typing from the surveillance van parked on Jefferson Street. Richard stood at the end of the pier, his back to the approaching footsteps, looking every inch the successful businessman even in this moment of confrontation. His charcoal coat was perfectly tailored, his silver hair immaculate despite the wind. When he turned to face Stephen, his smile was the same warm, paternal expression that had once made Stephen feel safe. Stephen, my boy, thank you for coming. Richard's voice carried genuine relief, as if this were a simple family misunderstanding. I was worried sick when your mother told me about your confusion last night. Confusion? Stephen kept his voice level, remembering Morrison's coaching. Get him talking. Let him explain. Criminals love to justify their actions. Is that what you call discovering I've been set up with a $50,000 fraud charge? Richard's expression shifted, the warmth cooling into something more calculating. You always were too smart for your own good. Linda warned me about that. He began walking slowly along the pier, forcing Stephen to follow. Tell me, what do you think you've discovered? I know about the shell companies, the false identities created with my information. The money laundering operation you've been running through high-end restaurants. Stephen felt steadier with each word. I know my mother was your partner from the beginning, not some desperate widow you rescued. Impressive. Richard's tone held genuine admiration. Most people never see past the surface narrative. They believe what they want to believe. The loving stepfather, the grateful new family, the second chance at happiness. He stopped walking and faced Stephen directly. But you saw through it all in one evening. Remarkable. Through his earpiece, Stephen heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. He's proud of himself, she whispered. That's dangerous. When Richard gets overconfident, he reveals too much. Why me? Stephen asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. You could have used anyone as a scapegoat. Why marry my mother? Why bring me into your operation? Richard's smile turned predatory. Because you were perfect, Stephen. Intelligent enough to create believable documentation, but young enough to be dismissed as a troubled teenager when things went wrong. Your father's death left you emotionally vulnerable, desperate for stability. And your mother... He paused, savoring the moment. Your mother was willing to sacrifice anything for financial security. Even her own son. The words hit Stephen like physical blows, but he forced himself to remain focused. How long have you been planning this? Planning to frame you specifically? About 8 months. Linda and I identified you as the ideal candidate shortly after we began working together. But the broader operation has been running for years. Richard's voice took on the tone of someone explaining a particularly clever business strategy. The restaurant money laundering scheme alone generates about $2 million annually. Add in the identity theft operations, the shell company frauds, the offshore accounts. Well, let's just say I live very comfortably. Marcus's voice crackled through the earpiece. I'm getting all of this. Morrison's going to love the detailed confession. But Stephen was focused on something else Richard had said. 8 months? But you only married my mother 6 months ago. Ah, you caught that. Richard looked genuinely pleased. Linda and I have been partners for over a year, Stephen. The romance, the courtship, the wedding. All theater designed to establish the family structure we needed for this operation. Your mother is quite talented at playing the grateful widow, don't you think? Stephen felt the last vestiges of hope about his mother's motivations crumble. She never loved you. You never loved her. It was all just business. Love is a luxury neither Linda nor I can afford. We have a much more honest relationship. Mutual benefit based on shared criminal enterprise. Much more reliable than emotion. Richard checked his watch. Which brings me to why I asked you here. Despite your investigation last night, this operation doesn't have to end badly for you. What do you mean? I mean that you could join us. Officially this time. You've already proven you have the intelligence and resourcefulness we need. Your little detective work last night was quite impressive. With proper guidance, you could become a valuable asset to our organization. Victoria's voice was urgent in his ear. He's trying to recruit you. This is how he controls people. He makes them complicit. Then they can't expose him without exposing themselves. Stephen stared at Richard, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The charm, the paternal warmth, the offers of stability and success. All of it was manipulation, carefully calibrated to exploit Stephen's deepest needs and fears. You want me to become a criminal, like you, like my mother. I want you to become successful, wealthy, secure, everything your mother told me you dreamed about. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate tone. Think about it, Stephen. Your friends from school will struggle through college, graduate with debt, spend decades climbing corporate ladders. Meanwhile, you could have everything you want within a few years. All it requires is flexibility about conventional morality. Through the earpiece, Stephen heard Morrison's voice. We have enough. Signal when you're ready for extraction. But Stephen wasn't ready. Not yet. He had one more question, one final piece of the puzzle he needed to understand. What happens if I say no? Richard's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, you already know too much to simply walk away. And there are several charges already pending under your name that would be very difficult to disprove without proper legal representation. The kind of legal representation that costs more than your mother could ever afford. You're threatening me. I'm explaining your options. Richard's voice remained conversational, but Stephen heard the steel underneath. Join us willingly, or be destroyed systematically. Those are the only choices available to people who discover my operation. Stephen looked out at the bay, the city skyline rising behind the fog, and realized this was the moment that would define the rest of his life. He could accept Richard's offer, become part of the criminal empire that had already cost him his family. Or he could fight, knowing that the battle would be vicious and the outcome uncertain. I have a third option, Stephen said quietly. Oh, and what would that be? Stephen smiled, thinking of Morrison and Marcus and Victoria, of Chef Dubois and James Wu, all the people who had chosen to help him when they had nothing to gain from it. I could make sure you never hurt anyone else the way you've hurt me. Richard's mask finally slipped, revealing the predator beneath. You stupid boy. You have no idea what you're up against. Signal, Stephen said quietly, speaking to his earpiece. I'm ready. The sounds of running footsteps echoed across the pier as Morrison's team moved in for the arrest. Part 7. The hunt intensifies. The arrest at Pier 39 should have been the end of the nightmare. Instead, it marked the beginning of Richard's most dangerous phase. Within 6 hours of being taken into custody, Richard Blackwood had posted bail through a team of high-powered attorneys Stephen hadn't even known existed. By evening, a carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Stephen's credibility was already in motion. Stephen sat in Detective Morrison's office, watching news coverage that painted him as a troubled teenager with a history of behavioral problems and possible mental health issues. The reporter, a polished woman with perfect hair and a concerned expression, spoke directly to the camera. Sources close to the family describe 17-year-old Stephen Thompson as increasingly unstable since his mother's remarriage. School records show declining grades and several incidents of disruptive behavior. Mental health experts warn that adolescents experiencing family transitions often act out in dramatic ways, including elaborate fantasies about persecution. None of that is true, Stephen said, his voice flat with disbelief. My grades haven't declined. I've never been disruptive in school. Where are they getting this information? Morrison's expression was grim. Richard's people are very good at creating false narratives. Forged school reports, manufactured witness statements, even social media posts backdated to make you look unstable. It's sophisticated character assassination. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face pale. It gets worse. They've created fake social media accounts in your name posting about revenge fantasies against your family. And there are supposed, quote, friends giving interviews about how you've been acting erratically for months. Victoria, who had been pacing by the window, turned sharply. This is exactly what he did to me. Create a false history, manufacture evidence of instability, then use it to discredit anything you say. By the time you realize what's happening, everyone believes you're the problem. Stephen's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Stephen, please come home. Richard's lawyers say this can all be worked out if you just admit you misunderstood what happened. We can get you help for your problems. She's still playing her part, Stephen said, showing the message to Morrison. Even now, she's trying to make me doubt my own sanity. That's the most insidious part of what they do, Victoria explained. They don't just attack your credibility with others, they make you question your own perception of reality. It's psychological warfare. Morrison's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her expression darkened further. James Wu has recanted his testimony. Claims he was confused, that he never actually saw Richard in the private dining room. Jeff Dubois is being audited by 3 different city departments simultaneously. Richard's closing ranks, Victoria said. Threatening witnesses, pressuring allies. He has connections throughout the city's business and political networks. People who owe him favors, people who can't afford to cross him. Stephen felt the walls closing in. So what do we do? If he can discredit all our witnesses and make me look crazy, how do we prove anything? We don't just defend, Morrison said. We attack. Marcus, what do you have on Richard's immediate plans? Marcus's fingers flew across his keyboard. I've been monitoring his communications since the arrest. He's planning to leave the country within 48 hours. Private jet to the Cayman Islands. Then probably somewhere without extradition treaties. But here's the interesting part. He's not just running. He's planning one final score. What kind of score? There's a major art auction tomorrow night at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. High-value pieces, lots of cash transactions, perfect for money laundering. Richard's been planning to use it as a way to move a massive amount of dirty money out of the country before he disappears. Victoria's eyes lit up. That's our chance. Richard can't resist one last big operation. His ego won't let him just run without proving how smart he is. Morrison leaned forward. If we can catch him in the act of money laundering at the auction, it won't matter what his lawyers say about Stephen's credibility. The evidence will speak for itself. But it's dangerous, Victoria warned. If Richard realizes we're onto this plan, he'll burn everything down. Stephen, your mother, anyone who can testify against him. We could all become targets. Stephen thought about the news reports painting him as unstable, about James Wu's recanted testimony, about his mother's continued manipulation. Richard was systematically destroying everyone who had stood up to him, just as Victoria had predicted. I want to be there, Stephen said, at the auction. I want to face him directly. Absolutely not, Morrison said immediately. It's too dangerous. Richard is desperate now, and desperate people. Make mistakes, Stephen interrupted. Victoria, you said Richard's ego is his weakness. He wants to prove he's smarter than everyone else. If I'm there, if he sees that his character assassination campaign hasn't broken me, he might get overconfident. Victoria studied Stephen's face. You're thinking like him now, using his psychology against him. That's either very smart or very dangerous. Maybe both, Stephen admitted. But I'm not hiding anymore. Richard destroyed my family, tried to ruin my life, and now he's hurting people who tried to help me. Someone has to stop him. And I'm the one person he's underestimated from the beginning. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. If we do this, you follow every instruction exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. This is a police operation with civilian assistance. not a teenager's revenge fantasy. I understand. And Stephen? Victoria's voice was serious. Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard will never stop coming after you. Are you prepared for that? Stephen looked around the room at the people who had become his real family. Marcus, still loyal despite everything. Morrison, risking her career to seek justice. Victoria, finally getting her chance to stop her father's crimes. Then he thought about Chef Dubois facing harassment for helping him, about James Wu forced to recant his testimony out of fear. He's not going to stop anyway, Stephen said. At least this way, maybe we can make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. As they planned the operation for the auction, Stephen realized his transformation was complete. The trusting teenager was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become the hunter. Tomorrow night, he would face Richard Blackwood one final time. But this time, Stephen would be ready for him. The hunt was about to become mutual. The San Francisco Museum of Modern Art glittered with champagne glasses and designer gowns as the city's elite gathered for the most exclusive auction of the year. Stephen adjusted his borrowed tuxedo, another gift from Chef Dubois, and scanned the crowd through the small camera hidden in his boutonniere. Morrison's voice crackled softly through his nearly invisible earpiece. Target acquired. Richard just entered through the main entrance, and he's not alone. Your mother is with him, plus 2 men who look like private security. Stephen's stomach tightened at the mention of his mother, but he forced himself to remain focused. Through the crowd, he spotted Richard moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this world of wealth and culture. Linda walked beside him, radiant in a silver evening gown, playing her role as the devoted wife to perfection. Stephen, Victoria's voice came through his earpiece from her position near the auction floor. Richard's heading toward the Picasso collection. That's where the big money transactions will happen. Pieces worth millions that can easily hide laundered funds. Stephen began moving through the crowd, using the skills Morrison had taught him to remain inconspicuous, while maintaining visual contact with his targets. As he drew closer, he could hear fragments of Richard's conversation with a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. The Monet acquisition should be straightforward, Richard was saying, his tone casual despite the astronomical sums being discussed. My associates in Singapore have confirmed the transfer protocols. Marcus's voice joined the chorus in Stephen's ear. I'm tracking multiple offshore accounts being activated simultaneously. This isn't just money laundering. It looks like Richard's moving his entire criminal fortune tonight. Stephen positioned himself behind a marble pillar, close enough to observe but hidden from direct view. Through his camera, he watched Richard and Linda work the crowd with practiced efficiency. They weren't just attending the auction, they were orchestrating it. Morrison, Stephen whispered, I think Richard has people placed throughout the auction house. This isn't just about bidding on art. He's coordinating with multiple buyers to move money in a complex pattern. Confirmed, Morrison replied. We're seeing suspicious activity from at least 6 different bidders, all using shells companies we've traced back to Richard's network. The auction began, and Stephen watched in fascination as Richard's operation unfolded. Pieces worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were purchased by seemingly unrelated buyers, but Stephen could see the subtle signals being passed between them. A nod here, a gesture there, an entire criminal orchestra conducted by Richard's barely perceptible movements. He's brilliant, Stephen admitted reluctantly into his microphone. And completely ruthless. Don't admire him, Victoria's sharp voice cut through his earpiece. Remember what he did to you. To me. To every other victim whose life he's destroyed. As if summoned by Stephen's thoughts, Richard's gaze swept the room and locked onto Stephen's position. For a moment, stepfather and stepson stared at each other across the crowded auction floor. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been respect, then hardened into cold calculation. Richard whispered something to Linda, who immediately began scanning the crowd. When her eyes found Stephen, her face went pale with what looked like genuine fear. He's made me, Stephen reported. They know I'm here. Stay calm, Morrison instructed. We need more evidence before we can move. Keep your distance, but maintain observation. But Richard wasn't content to maintain the status quo. With the same bold confidence that had characterized his criminal career, he began walking directly towards Stephen, Linda trailing reluctantly behind him. "Stephen, my boy," Richard called out as he approached, his voice carrying just far enough to attract attention from nearby auction-goers. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here. I thought you were still recovering from your recent difficulties." The words were carefully chosen, designed to reinforce the narrative of Stephen's supposed mental instability. Several well-dressed patrons turned to look, their expressions showing polite curiosity mixed with concern. "Hello, Richard," Stephen replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm feeling much better, thanks. Clear-headed, you might say." Linda stepped forward, her performance flawless as always. "Sweetheart, you look so thin. Have you been eating properly? This whole misunderstanding has been so hard on all of us." "Misunderstanding," Stephen repeated, loud enough for the growing audience to hear clearly. "Is that what you call identity theft and money laundering?" The nearby crowd began to murmur, their polite interest sharpening into something more intense. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his smile never wavered. "Stephen, you're clearly still confused about what happened at the restaurant. The doctors said these episodes might continue for a while." Richard turned to the crowd with practiced concern. "I'm afraid my stepson has been struggling with some mental health challenges recently. We're getting him the best care available." "Like the care you got for Victoria?" Stephen asked quietly. This time, Richard's composure cracked. The mention of his estranged daughter, spoken publicly, struck exactly the nerve Stephen had hoped to hit. "Victoria is a disturbed young woman who has been spreading lies about our family for years," Richard said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Just as Stephen is doing now." "Then it should be easy to prove," Stephen said, pulling out his phone. "I have recordings of our conversation at Pier 39. Would you like me to play them for everyone here?" The color drained from Linda's face. Richard's hand moved toward his jacket, toward what Stephen suddenly realized might be a weapon. "Morrison," Stephen said quietly, "I think we have a problem." But Morrison was already in motion. "All units, move in now. Suspect is potentially armed." The auction hall erupted into controlled chaos as plainclothes officers revealed themselves throughout the crowd. Richard's elaborate criminal orchestra suddenly found itself surrounded by law enforcement, their carefully orchestrated money laundering operation collapsing in real time. Richard grabbed Linda's arm with enough force to make her gasp. "You stupid boy!" he snarled at Stephen, his charming facade finally crumbling completely. "You have no idea what you've destroyed. This operation supports dozens of people, generates millions in revenue. You've ruined everything for what? Some adolescent sense of justice?" "I've stopped you from hurting anyone else," Stephen replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "That's enough for me." As Morrison's team closed in, Linda made her choice. She pulled away from Richard's grip and stepped toward Stephen, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Stephen. I thought I could protect you, but I just made everything worse." Richard stared at her with cold fury. "You pathetic." "Richard Blackwood," Morrison announced, her badge clearly visible. "You're under arrest for money laundering, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Richard looked directly at Stephen one final time. "This isn't over, boy. You may have won tonight, but you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Stephen met his gaze without flinching. "No, Richard. You will." The auction hall fell silent, except for the sound of Richard being led away, his criminal empire finally brought to justice by the teenager he had so dramatically underestimated. 3 weeks after Richard's arrest, Stephen sat in a federal courthouse waiting room, watching his mother through a glass partition as she spoke with her attorney. Linda looked smaller somehow, diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail. The transformation was jarring, from the elegant woman who had stood beside Richard at gallery openings to this hollow-eyed stranger facing federal charges. "She wants to see you," Detective Morrison said, settling into the chair beside Stephen. Her lawyer says she has things she wants to explain, apologies to make. Stephen studied his mother's profile through the glass. What's the point? Everything she'd say would just be another manipulation. She's had 3 weeks to think of the perfect words to make me feel guilty for testifying against her. Marcus looked up from his laptop where he'd been documenting the financial recovery process. The feds have recovered about 60% of the stolen money so far. Richard's offshore accounts, the shell companies, even some of the art from that auction. Your identity has been completely cleared, and there's a substantial victim compensation fund. Money doesn't fix what they did, Stephen said quietly. It doesn't give me back the family I thought I had. Victoria, who had been observing silently from across the room, finally spoke. Stephen, I know you don't want to hear this, but you might regret not talking to her. Not for her sake, for yours. I spent 5 years refusing to see Richard, and when he was finally arrested, I realized I had questions I'd never get answered. What kind of questions? Whether any of it was real. Whether he ever actually cared about me, even a little. Whether there was some part of the man I loved that existed beneath all the lies. Victoria's voice carried old pain. The not knowing. It stays with you. Stephen considered this as he watched Linda speak with her attorney. The animated gestures, the tears, the desperate expressions. Was any of it genuine? Or was she still performing even now? 5 minutes, he said finally. I'll give her 5 minutes. The meeting room was small and sterile, divided by reinforced glass with a phone system for communication. Linda's eyes filled with tears the moment Stephen sat down across from her. You look so grown up, she said, her voice distorted by the phone connection. So serious. I did that to you, didn't I? Took away your childhood. Stephen picked up his phone but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I know you hate me, Linda continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But I need you to understand something. I thought I was protecting you. By framing me for felony fraud, by securing your future. Richard promised that after this operation, we'd have enough money to disappear completely. New identities, new life, somewhere safe. You'd go to the best colleges, have every opportunity. Her voice broke. I convinced myself that temporarily putting you at risk was worth giving you a lifetime of security. Stephen studied her face, looking for signs of deception in her expression. When did it start? The criminal activity, I mean. Before you met Richard? Linda was quiet for a long moment. After your father died, I was drowning in debt. Medical bills, funeral costs, the mortgage. I took a job at a financial services company, and I noticed discrepancies. Money that didn't belong to anyone. Accounts that had been forgotten. I started small. Just a few $100s here and there. So you were already a thief when you met Richard. I was already desperate, Linda corrected, though the distinction felt hollow. Richard didn't corrupt me, Stephen. He just gave me bigger opportunities to be the person I'd already become. The honesty was more devastating than any lie would have been. Stephen had spent weeks hoping to discover that his mother had been coerced, manipulated, forced into criminality by Richard's influence. Learning that she had chosen this path independently, that Richard had simply recognized a kindred spirit, shattered his last illusions about her. Why did you have children if you were going to become this? Stephen asked, the question emerging from some deep place of hurt he hadn't even known existed. Linda pressed her hand against the glass, as if trying to reach through to touch him. I loved your father. I loved you. But love doesn't pay bills, Stephen. Love doesn't keep you from losing your house or guarantee your child's future. When your father got sick, I learned that love is a luxury you can only afford when you have security. So you chose security over love. I chose what I thought would give you the best life possible. Stephen hung up the phone and walked out without another word. In the courthouse hallway, Victoria was waiting for him. How do you feel? Empty, Stephen admitted. I thought I'd feel angry or hurt or something. But I just feel empty. That's normal. Learning that the people who raised you are fundamentally different from who you thought they were. It creates a kind of grief that's hard to describe. Detective Morrison approached them with a stack of legal documents. Stephen, I need you to review your victim impact statement before the sentencing hearing next week. The judge will want to hear how these crimes affected you personally." Stephen took the papers but didn't look at them immediately. "What's going to happen to her? To my mother, I mean." "With her cooperation and testimony against Richard, probably 5 to 7 years. Richard's looking at 25 to life given the scope of the operation and his prior record that Victoria helped us uncover." "Prior record?" Victoria nodded grimly. "Turns out my case wasn't the first time Richard had used family members as scapegoats. We found evidence of at least 3 similar operations over the past 15 years. Your mother might have thought she was protecting you, but Richard was always planning to destroy you eventually." That evening, Stephen sat in Chef Dubois' kitchen, helping prepare dinner while processing the day's revelations. The chef worked with practiced efficiency, but Stephen could sense his concern. "You are troubled by what your mother told you," Dubois observed, not looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "She thinks she was protecting me. Even now, even facing prison, she believes she was doing the right thing. Perhaps she was, by her understanding. People justify terrible actions by focusing on their intentions rather than their impact." Dubois paused in his work. "But intentions do not absolve consequences, and good motives do not make harmful actions acceptable." Marcus joined them in the kitchen, carrying his laptop and wearing the expression he got when he discovered something significant. "Stephen, you need to see this. I've been going through the recovered files from Richard's computers, and I found something about your college applications." Stephen looked up from the salad he'd been assembling. "What about them?" "Richard was sabotaging them. Every application you submitted over the past year, he had someone on the inside at each admissions office, making sure you'd be rejected. He needed you to feel desperate about your future, dependent on him for opportunities." The revelation hit Stephen like a physical blow. His rejections from colleges, the growing desperation about his future that had made Richard's promises so appealing, all of it had been orchestrated. "He was manipulating me for an entire year before I even knew it." "At least," Marcus confirmed. "Probably longer. Stephen, this guy didn't just commit crimes. He was a psychological predator who spent months breaking down your defenses before he ever put you in real danger." Victoria, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke quietly. "That's how Richard operates. He doesn't just steal money or commit fraud. He breaks people down psychologically until they can't trust their own judgment. Then he rebuilds them in whatever image serves his purposes." Stephen set down his knife and stared out the kitchen window at the San Francisco skyline. Somewhere in the city, his mother sat in a jail cell, still believing she had acted out of love. Somewhere else, Richard planned his legal defense, probably already strategizing how to manipulate his way to a reduced sentence. "I need to write my victim impact statement," Stephen said finally. "Not just about the financial crimes, but about all of it. The psychological manipulation, the systematic destruction of my trust, the way they turned my own family against me." "That's a good idea," Morrison said, entering the kitchen. "The judge needs to understand the full scope of what they did to you." As Stephen began mentally composing his statement, he realized that his transformation was nearly complete. He had evolved from Richard's intended victim to the architect of his downfall, from someone who trusted blindly to someone who could see manipulation clearly, from a teenager desperate for family approval to a young adult who understood that real family was chosen, not inherited. The pain of his mother's betrayal would probably never fully disappear, but Stephen was beginning to understand that healing didn't require forgetting or forgiving. It required accepting the truth about what had happened and choosing to build something better from the wreckage. Looking around Chef Dubois' kitchen at the people who had become his real family, Marcus with his unwavering loyalty, Victoria with her hard-won wisdom, Morrison with her dedication to justice, and Dubois with his quiet strength, Stephen realized that Richard's greatest failure hadn't been getting caught. It had been teaching Stephen the difference between people who claimed to love him and people who actually did. 6 months after Richard's conviction, Stephen stood in the kitchen of his own apartment, a modest but comfortable place in the Mission District that he'd been able to afford thanks to the Victim Compensation Fund and a part-time job at Chef Dubois' restaurant. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked a small community garden and for the first time in over a year, Stephen felt genuinely peaceful. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Acceptance letter came through. Stanford, full scholarship. We're both going to be broke college students together. Stephen smiled, remembering how impossible college had seemed during those dark weeks when Richard's sabotage had made his future appear hopeless. Now, with his applications resubmitted and his academic record cleared of Richard's manipulations, opportunities were opening that he'd thought were lost forever. The apartment door opened, and Victoria entered carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery downstairs. "Morning meeting of the Blackwood Survivors Club?" she said with a wry smile. "You know I hate that name," Stephen replied, but he was grinning as he said it. Victoria had become something between an older sister and a mentor over the past months, helping Stephen navigate the complex legal and emotional aftermath of the case. She'd also started a non-profit organization to help other victims of financial crimes, using her insider knowledge of Richard's methods to identify and assist people who'd been similarly manipulated. "How's your mother doing?" Victoria asked, settling into one of the mismatched chairs Stephen had furnished his apartment with. Stephen considered the question as he poured coffee. "She writes every week. The letters are different now. Less manipulation, more genuine remorse. Her therapist says acknowledging what she did without making excuses is part of her recovery process. Are you going to visit her?" "Maybe. Eventually. But not because I need her approval or because I'm hoping for some perfect reconciliation. If I visit, it'll be because I've decided she deserves a chance to earn forgiveness, not because I owe it to her." The distinction was important to Stephen. Over the months of therapy and reflection, he'd learned to separate his desire for family connection from his need for emotional safety. His mother might one day earn a place in his life again, but it would be as someone who had to prove herself worthy of trust, not as someone who automatically deserved it because of biology. Detective Morrison arrived just as Stephen was setting out plates. She'd become a regular at these informal gatherings, partly because the case had become one of the most significant financial crime prosecutions in the city's recent history, and partly because she'd grown genuinely fond of the young man whose determination had made it all possible. "Richard's final appeal was denied yesterday," she announced, accepting a cup of coffee. 25 years, no possibility of parole for 15. He's never going to hurt anyone else the way he hurt you and Victoria." Stephen felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. Relief, certainly, but also a kind of closure he hadn't expected. Richard Blackwood would spend the rest of his productive years in prison, his criminal empire dismantled, his ability to manipulate and destroy families permanently ended. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "The FBI wants to consult with both of you on a task force they're creating to identify and prosecute similar operations. Apparently, Richard's methods were being copied by other criminals, and your insights could help protect future victims." Victoria leaned forward with interest. "What would that involve?" "Training sessions with federal agents, consultation on ongoing cases where similar patterns emerge, maybe some public speaking to raise awareness. It would be voluntary, of course, and they'd work around your college schedules." Stephen considered the offer. 6 months ago, he would have wanted nothing more than to put the entire nightmare behind him and pretend it had never happened. But his perspective had evolved along with everything else about him. The experience had given him knowledge and insights that could protect other people from Richard's methods. It seemed selfish to keep that knowledge to himself. "I'm interested," he said. "But I want to finish my first year of college before I commit to anything major." Marcus arrived as they were discussing the details, carrying his laptop and wearing the expression of someone with news to share. "You guys need to see this," he said, setting up his computer on Stephen's kitchen table. "Remember how we could never figure out how Richard first identified you as a target? He said he and my mother chose me because I was the perfect candidate." Stephen replied, "Smart enough to create believable documentation, young enough to be dismissed as troubled when things went wrong." "Right, but what I never understood was how they found you in the first place. How did Richard know to approach your mother specifically?" Marcus pulled up a complex web of data on his screen. "I've been analyzing the personal information that was available about your family online, and I found something interesting. The screen showed a timeline of social media posts, public records, and digital footprints that painted a detailed picture of Stephen's family life following his father's death. His mother's financial struggles, Stephen's academic achievements, even the specific nature of his father's medical expenses, all of it was accessible to someone who knew how to look. Richard didn't randomly meet your mother and decide to use her, Marcus explained. He specifically targeted your family based on a digital profile that identified you as an ideal victim. Your intelligence, your family's financial vulnerability, your emotional need for stability. He knew all of it before he ever approached your mother. The revelation was both disturbing and oddly comforting. It meant that Richard's manipulation had been even more calculated than Stephen had realized, but it also meant that nothing about Stephen's response to the situation had been predictable or controllable. Richard had chosen him as a victim, but Stephen had chosen to become a survivor. That information could be crucial for the FBI task force, Morrison noted. Understanding how these predators identify targets could help us develop better protective measures. As his friends discussed the implications of Marcus's discovery, Stephen stepped out onto his small balcony and looked out over the city. San Francisco stretched out below him. The same city where he'd once felt trapped and hopeless, now transformed into a place of opportunity and new beginnings. His phone rang. Chef Dubois' name appeared on the screen. "Stephen, my friend." The chef's familiar voice carried warmth and excitement. "I have news. The Restaurant Association has approved the scholarship program we discussed. Full culinary school tuition for young people who have overcome significant adversity. You will be our first recipient if you choose to accept." Stephen smiled, touched by the offer but also amused by how many different paths his life could now take. College, FBI consultation, culinary school, victim advocacy. A year ago, his future had seemed entirely dependent on Richard's promises. Now, he had more opportunities than he could pursue simultaneously. "Thank you, Chef. That means everything to me. Let me think about it?" "Of course. You have earned the right to choose your own future." That phrase resonated as Stephen rejoined his friends in the kitchen. He had earned the right to choose his own future, not through privilege or luck, but through courage and determination in the face of betrayal. The teenager who had walked into Le Bernardin hoping for family approval was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real strength came from within, and real family was built through trust and loyalty rather than obligation. Looking around at Marcus, Victoria, Morrison, and thinking of Chef Dubois, Stephen realized he had everything he'd ever actually wanted. Not the illusion of security that Richard had promised, but the genuine relationships that made security possible. Not the appearance of family that money could buy, but the chosen family that had formed around shared values and mutual respect. Richard Blackwood had intended to destroy Stephen Thompson. Instead, he had created someone far stronger than the naive teenager who had once trusted him. And that, Stephen reflected with satisfaction, was a kind of justice that no court could have delivered. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but full of possibility, and for the first time in his life, Stephen knew he was ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.